Is it possible to view this visit from the King in the wake of his mother's death outside of the prism of either being a unionist or a nationalist? Or is it possible that there are people in Northern Ireland in 2022 who are both, who also feel incredibly sad about what's happened and want to pay their respects to the new monarch?
I think the sense of sadness is something that does go beyond the party political. Uh, she had an extraordinary ability to engage with people, and she brought a dignity to her relationships, which was very important. As the King is going to all the parts of the United Kingdom, I remember in her Golden Jubilee, she was going to all the parts of the United Kingdom, and the Northern Ireland office were very concerned that it was going to be troublesome and difficult. In fact, Sinn Féin, in the person of Alex Maskey, who was their chief whip at the time, came to me and said that they would deal with it with a dignified detachment. And then, of course, in 2012, as has been mentioned, she came and Martin McGuinness met her and shook hands with her, a dignified engagement. That move from detachment to engagement and the overall sense of dignity in relationships was something that she contributed to the Irish peace process in a way that no one else could or did.
Position giving her that unique ability. And I wonder if you think actually the signals we're getting from the King, the fact that he's launched this Operation Springtide, as it's described, this visiting of all four corners of the Union in the immediate wake of his accession, is an indicator, because that's something the Queen didn't do when she rose to become Queen, is a signal really of how he sees the Union as absolutely important, that the Union is absolutely front and centre of his sovereign reign.
I think that's quite right. And another thing that I would say about it is that people often think of it in party political terms and in political terms, but he's looking at it, I think, as she did, very much more as the emotional bond, the relationship. And without those relationships, the politics will never hold. With those relationships, political difference can be held, but the relationship with the monarch is something that goes beyond that. And I may say that many of my colleagues from the Republic of Ireland, long outside of the United Kingdom, still feel an affection for her and for the sovereign because of the way she conducted things. And I have no reason to believe that it will be different with King Charles. Don't forget his great family leader, Lord Mountbatten, died because he insisted on coming to the Republic of Ireland and the IRA killed him. That didn't stop Her Majesty meeting with Martin McGuinness, didn't even stop the Duke of Edinburgh from meeting with Martin McGuinness. There is an affection that goes beyond politics, an affection for the royal family, even in the Republic of Ireland.
Yeah, impossible to speculate about how King Charles will feel about that. But of course, we all know the close relationship that he had with Lord Mountbatten. I mean, many people saw him as, you know, a more fatherly relationship with him than even the Duke of Edinburgh. Do you think that Lord Mountbatten will be on his mind today?
Well, I have no idea whether he'll be on his mind. He'll have an extraordinary number of things on his mind. But I suspect that it will be in his feelings at some point and at some level. It would be hard for that not to be the case because, as you say, they were very close indeed, and it was a terrible tragedy. But, you know, over the years, people have got over these kinds of things, not by forgetting about them, but about realizing that we need to find ways of living and working together despite all the difficulties that there have been. And I have no doubt that while King Charles will remember all of these things, whether or not right in the fore of his mind or not, he certainly will work diligently to overcome the difficulties and build relationships, because he has done that throughout his time as Prince of Wales, not just in the United Kingdom, but right across the Commonwealth and beyond. It's that bond of relationship beyond the ties of politics that is the strength of the royal family in the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth.
That being said, Lord Alderdice, we'll all have seen how this relationship has been forged in the last week between our new king and our new Prime Minister, both starting in these huge roles at the same time, travelling to all four corners of the UK together, side by side for many of these events. And of course, Liz Truss will come with some sort of baggage, won't she, into Northern Ireland? Not only was she Foreign Secretary during all of the Brexit debates and talk about the protocol, but there are lots of question marks about the future and the implications for the Good Friday Agreement and where exactly things are going in terms of, peace in Northern Ireland. So will that be difficult for the King to be walking side by side with Liz Truss in Northern Ireland in that context?
I think it will be much less difficult for people in Northern Ireland to understand this than it will be for people outside Northern Ireland. It's always entirely possible for people in Northern Ireland to understand these subtle differences and respond to them. And they won't get confused about Liz Truss on the one hand and King Charles on the other hand. They'll be very clear about it. I think it actually must be a bit of a difficult thing for Liz Truss. Here she reaches the pinnacle of her career. She becomes Prime Minister and she tries to do some major things in terms of funding because of the crisis that we have over energy and so on. And it's all completely overwhelmed by the death of Her Majesty and the accession of the new king. So I think she's probably the one that's going to find things a bit more difficult. I don't think, by the way, there's any risk to the peace process at all. Nobody is thinking or talking about going back to war. That's over and past. There is a problem of the political process. Mm-hmm. And there's no doubt that that's going to be difficult. And she's going to find it difficult in her new role, which is quite different from any other role. But I rather suspect that we're going to find a way through all of that. Don't forget, we've been through far more difficult and complicated things during the earlier stage of peace process. And I think we'll find a way through this political difficulty. Politics always has difficulties in it. And it's the job of politicians to find a way through without things breaking down.
It is indeed. And look, just a final thought, because I know you had the honour of meeting Her Majesty the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh many times. Any stories you'd like to share with us as we sort of reflect on her life and her impact on Northern Ireland?
Well, everybody knows that the Duke of Edinburgh was a man with his own sense of humour and a bit of a rascal at times. And I remember there was one occasion whenever we were entertaining international guests, and he came over to me quietly and he said, "You're from Ireland, aren't you?" I said, "Yes, that's right." He said, "Did you hear about the two Irishmen that went past the pub without going in for a drink?" I said, "No, I didn't." He says, "No, I've never heard of two Irishmen going past the pub without going in for a drink." And she came up behind him and said, "Philip." And you could hear in her voice there was that kind of relationship whereby she knew he was being a rascal. She rather enjoyed it, but she knew that, well, it might not go entirely well. In fact, it was very funny, partly because of the way he did it and partly because of the loving but careful relationship that she showed.
Oh, she always had to be his handbrake, didn't she, trying to restrain him. Lord Alderdice, lovely anecdote, lovely to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed.